Today we are going to discuss the pathology and clinical presentations of these salivary glands. As you know, there are two types of salivary glands: major salivary glands and the minor salivary glands. Major salivary glands are the parotid glands, submandibular glands, sublingual glands. The other group is called minor salivary glands. They are uniformly distributed in the upper aerodigestive tract in the submucosa, which includes the floor of mouth, cheeks, hard palate, soft palate, uvula, oropharynx, nasopharynx, and laryngopharynx. It also includes the maxillary antrum also. Before we discuss the pathology of the salivary gland tumor and the clinical presentation, it is very important we should know the anatomy of the one of the major salivary gland, that is parotid. As you know, the parotid gland is one of the large size major salivary gland that lies in front of the ear, below and behind the lobe of the ear. A part of it is descent in the neck, just close to the angle of mandible, and its extension is called tail of the parotid, which may extend up to 2 or 3 centimeters. It is established fact that the parotid gland is a purely a serous gland, and it has got two lobes. One lobe, which is superficial to the facial nerve, is called superficial lobe. A lobe which is behind the facial nerve is called deep lobe. The total bulk of the parotid lies in the superficial lobe. That is, the 85% volume of the parotid tissue lies in the superficial lobe. The facial nerve and its branching and the ramification act as like a sandwich between the superficial and the deep lobe. The facial nerve lies on the deep lobe, which is very small in size, and part of it lies on the masseter muscles. The facial nerve, which is the most important nerve in this parotid gland, and that control the facial expression of the face. The facial nerve exit out from the stylomastoid foramen, and after its emergence, it divides into two main divisions. One is called temporofacial, and other is called, lower division is called cervicofacial. It is just like a Y-shaped. You can see in the operation theater how the nerve emerges out, and it has got two divisions: zygomaticofacial or temporofacial, or the cervicofacial. The temporofacial divides into two branches. One is the temporal branches, and second is the zygomatic branches. The zygomatic branch or branches cross the zygoma and supplies the orbicularis oculi. This muscle is important for the closure of the eyeball, and the temporal branches supplies the temporal muscle. The lower division, which is called cervicofacial, it divides into a buccal branch then is the marginal mandibular branch, and the third one is the cervical branch. The buccal branch supplies the buccinator muscle. The second is marginal mandibular branch, which supplies the orbicularis oris, and the cervical branch, which supplies the platysma. When the zygomatic branch is damaged, there is a failure of closure of the eyeball. When the buccal branch is damaged, the food or saliva collects in the buccoalveolar sulcus. The patient complains that the food stays into the ipsilateral side of the cheek between the teeth and the wall of the cheek. If the marginal mandibular branch is damaged, which is more vulnerable to be damaged, you will find there is a drop of the angle of mouth. The angle of mouth on that side is obtuse. That means the marginal mandibular branch is damaged, and that side of the angle of mouth will obtuse. Regarding the cervical branch, it has no impact functional point of view. Sometimes you will find that between these zygomatic temporal and cervical facial, a little distant beyond its division, there is a one twig or more twigs join the two branches, the two main divisions together. Maybe a single twig or more than one twig, which joins the upper and the lower division. This is called interconnection or interconnecting twigs, which join the upper division with the lower division at a variable distance from its primary division. That is why in sometimes you will find if a one branch or there is a injury to the facial nerve of one branch, there may be a late recovery of the partial paralyzed facial injury. It is because of this connection at times will able to control the movements. But it is not in a routine cases, but sometimes you will find there will be recovery of the partial facial muscle paralysis. It is because of this interconnection of these two divisions of the facial nerve. The deep lobe is deep to the facial nerve, but as the deep lobe is very small in size, it constitutes the 10 to 15% of the volume of the total parotid. It is closely related to the temporal vessels, which is deep to the deep lobe. There is no anatomical boundary between the superficial and the deep lobe. The only structure which separates the deep lobe from the superficial lobe is the facial nerve and its branches and further ramification. The facial nerve branches or its division like a pes cavus, that is foot of the goose. Temporal branches, zygomatic branches, buccal branch, marginal mandibular branch, and the cervical branch. The facial nerve on the face is purely a motor nerve, which supplies the muscles of facial expression. If the main trunk is damaged during the surgery, ipsilateral half of the face is just like blank. No movements, no closure, no action of the buccinator. If you ask the patient to blow out, to inflate the air in the mouth, because of loss of function of buccinator, that site will be paralyzed. That is a paralyzed site, so it cannot able to retain the air in the oral cavity because of loss of action of buccinator on the ipsinator side. You ask the patient to show your teeth, you will find there is a deviation of the lip on the contralateral side. This side of angle of mouth will be dropped or obtuse. Regarding the venous drainage of the parotid gland, the lymphatic drainage is in the first is in the intraparotid lymph nodes. There are few lymph nodes which are present within the parenchyma of the parotid tissue. Intraparotid lymph nodes, and the second group of the lymph node which drains the parotid gland is anterior cervical chain, which is also labeled as the L1. That includes the submental, subventricular, preauricular, postauricular, and the occipital. But this anterior cervical chain is L1, where the lymphatic drainage of the parotid glands, and as these lymph nodes they are interlinked with the deep cervical lymph nodes, so the secondaries can go from L1 to L2, L3, or in a very advanced disease, this max can go even to involve the L5 also. This parotid gland is enclosed in the parotid fascia, which is that above to the and below, so that the gland is within the parotid fascia. Above is to the zygoma and below is to the horizontal ramus of the mandible, where it is attached, so that this gland has a very little mobility, but as it is enclosed in the parotid fascia. That is about the anatomy which you should know as undergraduates, because now we are going to discuss a second anatomical anatomy or anatomical landmarks for the other important submandibular salivary gland. Is also a major salivary gland. They are two in number, as the parotid they are also two in number. The submandibular salivary gland is the mixed gland. Part of it is mucus and part of it is serous. In parotid gland, it is drained into the oral cavity by a duct which is called Stenson duct, or it's called parotid duct. This parotid duct enters into the oral cavity, into the mucosa of the oral cavity, just opposite to the upper second molar tooth by a papilla. This is called parotid duct. That is the where the duct enters in the vestibule of the mouth, just opposite to the upper molar tooth on either side. The submandibular salivary gland lies in the submandibular fossa. This gland again has got two parts. The part which is superficial to the mylohyoid muscle is called superficial lobe, and the part of the submandibular salivary gland which lies deep to the mylohyoid muscle is called deep lobe. It is still again a sort of a landmarks which determine the superficial lobe and the deep lobe. The tumor which is superficial to the mylohyoid is superficial lobe. The part of the submandibular salivary gland which is deep to the mylohyoid is called deep lobe. This submandibular salivary gland has got a very important few anatomical landmarks, which is very important to know it. Otherwise, you will damage a lot of important nerve which may be likely to be damaged. This submandibular gland is supplied by the facial artery, which enters at its posterior part of the gland. It grooves the deep surface of the submandibular salivary gland and then comes just in front of the angle of the mouth. This is called facial artery. And there is what is called facial vein. This is anterior facial vein. The first, and it is bounded anteriorly by the anterior belly of digastric and posteriorly by the posterior belly of the digastric muscle. And then there is an intermediate tendon which joins the anterior belly with the posterior belly of the digastric muscle. The one important nerve which is you should know is the marginal mandibular branch. When you place the incision below the horizontal ramus of the mandible, it is very much important. The marginal mandibular branch, it dips into the neck, then again it goes up in front of the angle of the mandible to supply the orbicularis oris. So when you place the incision, this nerve is deep to the platysma. And it's very important, when you dissect the upper flap, you should identify the anterior facial vein and the facial artery, because this marginal mandibular branch hooks, or it crosses over the anterior facial vein and facial artery. So you should tie these vessels below the crossing of this marginal mandibular branch and tie and divide it, and the distal stump should be placed with artery forceps on the face, so that this nerve is now off the operative field. That is called Leahy's technique, to avoid the marginal mandibular branch of the facial nerve, to divide the platysma at a lower level, at least a 1 finger breadth below and parallel to the horizontal ramus of the mandible. And this platysmofacial plane you raise up, you can see the marginal mandibular branch crossing the anterior facial nerve. Just below it, you can divide it, tie it, and put off out of field of the operation with the artery forceps after tying the vessel and division of the vessels. This is called Leahy's technique, to avoid the injury to the marginal mandibular branch of the facial nerve. The second important point you should remember, when you are dissecting the gland from below upwards, just above the intermediate tendon of the bellies of digastric muscle, on the posterior surface, a nerve which crosses the external or internal carotid artery runs on the posterior surface of the submandibular gland, just above the level of intermediate tendon of bellies of digastric muscle. So this is what is called as the hypoglossal nerve. This is very important nerve. It supplies the intrinsic musculature of the tongue, and if the hypoglossal nerve is damaged, ipsilateral half of the tongue is paralyzed. Tongue deviated towards the opposite side because of decussation of the fibers. This is a motor nerve which supplies to ipsilateral half of the tongue. When you retract the mylohyoid muscle and look at the deep lobe, to come from where the Wharton's duct is called submandibular duct, or this submandibular duct arises from the deep lobe. In the floor of mouth, the lingual nerve winds around it. You can see the ribbon-shaped broader nerve which is winding around the submandibular duct, and then it enters into the floor of mouth. This ribbon-shaped structure in the floor of mouth after the retraction of the mylohyoid muscle, exposing the deep lobe, look for the submandibular duct. The only nerve which is winding around it, looping around it, is the lingual nerve, and that is the sensory nerve which supplies to the ipsilateral half of tongue. If the lingual nerve is damaged, the loss of taste sensation or sensory loss occur in the ipsilateral half of the tongue. So that is the relationship of this lingual nerve with the duct, and the duct arises from the deep lobe of the submandibular salivary gland, and this duct has got a close association, rather winding around the duct is the lingual nerve. So when you are dealing with the submandibular salivary gland operation, there are three nerves which are at risk. The commonest one is the marginal mandibular branch of the facial nerve, when you are placing the incision and raising the flaps. When you are lifting up the submandibular gland from its floor, there is a nerve which lies there, which crosses horizontally, crossing over the carotids, entering into the submandibular fossa. That structure is called hypoglossal nerve. And the third structure you meet when you are tying the submandibular duct. Be careful that you should not damage the lingual nerve. So lingual nerve, hypoglossal nerve, and the marginal mandibular branch, there are three nerves which are at risk when you are doing the surgery for submandibular salivary gland. And the third major salivary gland is the lingual gland, which lies in the floor of the mouth, underneath the tongue, on either side of the frenum. And this gland is a mucus gland. All the minor salivary glands, they are mucus secreting glands which lie in the submucosa of the upper aerodigestive tract. So this is all about the anatomy or surgical anatomy of the major salivary glands. I have told you in the beginning, the parotid glands, they are serous gland. Submandibular gland, they are mixed gland, serous and as well as the mucus. And the minor salivary glands, which are distributed in the oral cavity or the oropharynx or laryngopharynx, these are the mucous glands. Now we will first discuss about the salivary gland tumors. First we will discuss about the major salivary gland tumors. And the most important and the largest salivary gland is the parotid gland. The tumors of the parotid, by and large, are uncommon. They constitute the 3 to 4% of the malignancy of the tumor of the head and neck. The salivary gland tumors, there are two types. Parotid, one is the benign and second is the malignant. Among the benign tumors, the commonest one tumor of the parotid gland is mixed parotid tumor known as pleomorphic adenoma. The second benign tumor is adenolymphoma, which is also known as Warthin's tumor. The malignant tumors of the parotid, the most commonest malignant tumor of the parotid, which constitute the 15 to 20% of the total number of the cancer of the parotid is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. It has got a variable grading and aggression. The second commonest tumor, malignant tumor, is adenoid cystic carcinoma of the parotid. The third tumor, which should remember, is carcinoma X pleomorphic adenoma. That is called malignant mixed parotid tumor. X carcinoma X pleomorphic adenoma. The fourth tumor are ethnic cell tumors. They are also malignant. Then you can also have got the adenocarcinoma, salivary duct carcinoma, anaplastic carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, or the tumor arising from the intraparotid lymph nodes is non-Hodgkin or Hodgkin lymphoma. How the parotid tumor present? Any mass, any swelling in the preauricular area or below or behind the lobe of the ear, or rarely in the neck, upper part of neck, is a parotid tumor. I again repeat it. Any swelling in front of the ear, below or behind the lobe of the ear, or extension or a swelling in the upper part of the neck, just close the angle of the mandible, is a parotid mass unless otherwise ruled out. Second important point, any lump and bump which is in the area of the parotid or within the parotid, most likely in 85% of the cases, that mass is pleomorphic adenoma, mixed parotid tumor, unless otherwise ruled out. The commonest tumor of the parotid gland is pleomorphic adenoma. The commonest benign tumor of the parotid gland is pleomorphic adenoma. It appears as a lump, which is painless, slowly growing, maybe in the preauricular area, below the lobule of ear, behind the lobe of the ear, or sometimes it is extending into the upper part of neck, just behind the angle of mandible. This is a slowly growing tumor, present as a mass. If you examine it, you will find this is arising from the parotid. Clinically, you can prove it by ultrasound, which is just like a road map. And the other important thing is the majority of the pleomorphic adenoma, they arise from the superficial lobe of the parotid. Because I have already discussed, the superficial lobe is the main bulk of the parotid gland. So obviously, any lump and bump which appear from the superficial lobe, because it constitutes the greatest volume of the parotid, while the deep lobe is very small, ovoid shape, which constitutes the 10 to 15% of the total bulk of the parotid tissue. So the majority of the lesions which arise as a tumor from the parotid gland, they are from the superficial lobe, that is the lobe which is anterior to the facial nerve. This tumor, pleomorphic adenoma, grows very slowly. This lump may be present for many years or months, painless. In addition to that, if you examine it, you find a swelling or bulge or a lump in the parotid area, mobile, maybe cystic, maybe firm, and it can may be present in front of the ear, below the lobule of the ear, or behind the lobule of ear. These are the three sides because the thyroid gland, its parotid gland itself has got three extensions, a three component. The cervical part, very small, which is also called the tail of the parotid. The part which is close to the mastoid process is called mastoid part behind the lobe of the ear, and the part which is in front of the ear is called perifacial part. So facial, cervical, and the mastoid part. These are three components, anatomical components of the anatomical boundaries of the parotid gland. The second, 10 to 15% of the cases, this pleomorphic adenoma or mixed parotid tumor may arise from the deep lobe, which can present more in the oral cavity as a swelling in the parapharyngeal space lateral to the area of the tonsil. This swelling can push the tonsil medially, and when the deep lobe is enlarged, it bulges its appearance in the parapharyngeal space. So it's very important when you are examining a swelling in the parotid area, or when you examining the parotid gland, you must know it has got a deep lobe, although the incidence of lesion is very small as compared to superficial lobe, but it's very important to open the oral cavity and you look for the parapharyngeal space. If the deep lobe is enlarged, it can bulge in the parapharyngeal space and leads to medialization of the tonsil. And that swelling is the swelling which is arising from the deep lobe. It bulges in the parapharyngeal space. So you must open the mouth to look for the parapharyngeal space. Is there any swelling arising from the deep lobe? And the third thing is, which is important in examination of the parotid gland, one is you must check the facial nerve. Sometimes apparently there is no weakness, but when you test the nerve, there may be creases there. So one should be very careful while examining the parotid swelling. You must examine the facial nerve. It's all branches, zygomatic branches, buccal branch, and the marginal mandibular branch. Then it is also important to examine the cervical group of lymph nodes as a part of the examination of the parotid swelling. After that, when you made a diagnosis of a pleomorphic adenoma, what is the next thing to do it? To confirm your diagnosis, the swelling is actually arising from the parotid gland, is the ultrasound. Ultrasound is a very useful investigation, non-invasive, easily available, no preparation of the patient, no exposure of irradiation, and it is operator dependent. It will let you know the swelling is arising from the parotid. What about the texture of the swelling? Homogeneous, heterogeneous, is solid component only or solid and cystic component only? And what is the extension of this swelling in the surrounding tissues? Of course, you can also see on ultrasound any pathological enlargement of the lymph nodes. Any lymph node which is 1 centimeter or bigger size is a pathological lymph node. Sub-centimeter lymph nodes, they have no value. in clinical practice. After that, you need a objective evidence that you are really dealing with the case of pleomorphic adenoma, which is arising from the superficial lobe in majority of 90% of the cases. Sometimes this pleomorphic adenoma is arising both from the superficial lobe and part of it from the deep lobes, double shaped swelling, and very rarely it is found in 10% of the cases. This tumor is arising from the deep lobe. That is only in 10% of the cases. In 90% of the cases, this pleomorphic adenoma arises from the superficial lobe of the parotid, maybe in the facial component, maybe from the mastoid component behind the lobe of the, or maybe from the tail of the parotid, which is cervical component. It may be double shaped very rarely. We have seen a few cases. Sometimes the superficial lobe is very much thin out and the swelling was arising from the deep lobe, and the facial lobe is just in between the two, and that tumor arising from the deep lobe. Very rarely, only in 10% of the cases. So after the ultrasound examination for the parotid, the swelling and the lymph nodes, cervical lymph node must be examined by the sono. The second investigation, which has stood the test of time, and it's a gold standard investigation, is FNAC, fine needle aspiration cytology. It can be performed percutaneous. If the lesion is deep, you can help the sono so that you can hit the needle and take the tissue for or the cells for cytology. It is operator dependent. It will let you know that are you dealing with the case of a pleomorphic adenoma or adenolymphoma, or you are dealing with the case of a carcinoma of the parotid. Remember one thing, one cancer which mimic with the pleomorphic adenoma is mucoepidermoid carcinoma of the parotid, is the commonest malignant tumor of the parotid after the benign tumor of pleomorphic adenoma. So this FNAC is very important. It gives you a clue so that you do the first operation. The first operation should be the right operation. It has happened, people, they don't get a proper FNAC and they perform the superficial lobectomy or superficial conservative parotidectomy, and the histology shows mucoepidermoid carcinoma of the parotid. Then they refer that this should be redone, redo surgery. Very difficult in this area because of the adhesions and fibrosis or previous surgery. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to save the facial nerve. There are more chances it can be damaged during the redo surgery. One should also tell to the patients and clear to the relatives and the patient that this is the problem which we will encounter during the operation. It may be partially damaged, or it may be more than a partial damage, so it is very difficult to ensure that there are no chance of injury to the facial nerve when you are doing the redo surgery. So the FNAC has stood the test of time for any lump and bump in the area of the parotid or submandibular salivary gland tumor. After that, if it is a pleomorphic adenoma, you can do two operations for pleomorphic adenoma. If it is arising from the superficial lobe of the parotid, you will do the superficial lobectomy of the parotid, or in other words, superficial conservative parotidectomy. Superficial conservative parotidectomy means you remove the superficial lobe of the parotid, which is superficial to the facial nerve, and you conserve the facial nerve and leave intact the deep lobe. This is called superficial conservative parotiditis. If the tumor is arising from the deep lobe, or the tumor arising a part of it from the superficial lobe and a part of it from the deep lobe, this is called double shaped tumor, or the tumor arising from the deep lobe, then the treatment is total conservative parotiditis. You have to ensure the facial nerve must be intact. That is the beauty of the operation. So you should not enucleate or shelling out the tumor, because pleomorphic adenoma, though it is an adenoma, but it has not a true capsule. It has a false capsule or pseudo capsule, because there is a break in the capsule at certain sites from where the tissue can come out. When you enucleate it or shell out, there are chances of higher recurrence. No place of shelling out of the tumor or extra capsular excision of the tumor or a nucleation of the tumor. These operations are mentioned to be condemned. The only operation which is time tested, as to the test of time, is either you perform the superficial conservative parotidiectomy for the tumor, pleomorphic adenoma, or any benign tumor of the parotid arising from the superficial lobe of the parotid, and integrity of the facial nerve must be maintained. You have to expose the facial nerve along with its branches to ensure its integrity. If the tumor is involving the deep lobe or arising from the deep lobe, then answer is total conservative parotidiectomy. You have to save the facial nerve, as it is not a malignant tumor. Some people, they use nerve stimulator, any fibrous band, they think is a tumor. They just touch with the stimulator, and there is a action potential is there, and they feel the twitching is there. So this is the part of the facial nerve. There are two operations for a benign tumor. Now the second commonest malignant tumor of the parotid, I have told you, is the mucoepidermoid carcinoma, adenoid cystic carcinoma, carcinoma ex pleomorphic adenoma, and actinic cell tumors, squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, anaplastic carcinoma, and also lymphoma, which is arising from the intraparotid tissue. The mucoepidermoid carcinoma is the commonest malignant tumor of the parotid. It has got a variable or divergent histological and as well as the biological. So histologically and biologically, there is a wide divergence. Mucoepidermoid carcinoma may be mild, moderate, and severe, grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. Grade 1 is well differentiated, grade 2 is moderately differentiated, and grade 3 is poorly differentiated, or grade 4 is called anaplastic. So biological aggressiveness entirely depend upon the grading of the tumor, and the grading is determined by the heterogeneity of the lesion, mitotic figures, neural invasion, lymphovascular invasion, and these are the factors which shows the histological grading. So the histological grading varies in mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Second is the histologically it is very important in a carcinoma of the parotid what histological grading is. So that shows the aggression of the tumor in carcinoma of the parotid. Histological grading, or you can say the biological aggression, what is histopathology and what is the grading of the tumor. They are two important factors which does affect the prognosis. One is the grading of the tumor, and second is the histology, and third one is very important, is the stage of the disease, that is TNM classification. If the patient has got a carcinoma of the parotid, proven FNAC, the second investigation which required, if it is a malignant, is ultrasound, which gives a roadmap that will let you know the rough idea about the extension of the tumor and the involvement of the lymph nodes. But the best investigation, which has to the test of time, is CT with IV contrast, which lets you know the heterogeneity of the tumor, extent of the spread of the tumor in the surrounding tissue involving the bone, muscle, facial nerve, auditory canal, cartilage, pterygoid plate, base of the skull. These are all structures which are present in the vicinity of the parotid gland. So this is the size of the tumor, texture of the tumor, and the direct spread into the surrounding tissues, and that is facial nerve, the muscles, the buccinator, the masseter, the mandible, the arterial canal, the base of the skull, the pterygoid plate, and the pterygoid muscles, and of course the involvement of the lymph nodes. What is the extent of involvement of the lymph nodes? One lymph nodes, multiple lymph nodes are involved. Which categorize the N, 1, 2, 3, and T. You know that T is T0, T, IS, T1, 2, 3, and 4. As a principle, you should remember any tumor of malignant tumor of the salivary gland, if less than 4 centimeter, irrespective of the involvement of the lymph nodes or the structures surrounding it, the prognosis is usually good, especially when the size of the tumor of the malignant tumor of the salivary gland is 4 centimeter or less. If the tumor size, when I say tumor, is malignant tumor size is more than 4 centimeter, the prognosis is usually poor. So figure 4 centimeter above, poor prognosis, below is a good prognosis. So 4 centimeter is the landmark which affects the prognosis overall of the malignant tumors of the salivary gland. Once it has been diagnosed, this is a case of a carcinoma of the major salivary glands, especially the parotid or the submandibular salivary gland. The treatment is total parotidectomy. If the nerve is not involved, you should try to save it, or if it is not going through the tumor, try to save it. But if you find the tumor has already involved the facial nerve, then the operation you will do it is the radical parotidectomy. That is, you will remove the whole parotid, including the facial nerve, plus the soft tissue involved around that. It may be a part of the mandible also. En bloc resection, which includes total parotidectomy with you sacrifice the facial nerve also, plus the en bloc resection of the surrounding tissue, which may be skin, part of it, overlying it, it is involved. If the mandible is involved, you have to do a segmental resection of the mandible. You have to take off the muscles one, and if the lymph node found enlarged, you have to do the modified block dissection of the neck. That is the treatment of advanced carcinoma of the parotid. The treatment will be radical parotidectomy. If the cancer is only involving the parotid tissue, that is intraparenchymal, the treatment still the total parotidectomy, or you can say is the total conservative parotidectomy. because the facial nerve is intact, fortunately, because it has not been invaded one, or sometimes a part or branch of it may be invaded one. So you can say total semi-conservative prostatectomy. You save the uh, zygomatic branch which supply to the eyeball, but you couldn't able to save the uh, marginal mandibular branch of the cervicofacial branch. So this is called as the total semi-conservative prostatectomy. So for the cancer of the prostate, depending upon the extent of spread of the lesion to involve the facial nerve, there are various operations to it. Total conservative prostatectomy when the tumor is only intraparenchymal, not involve the facial nerve, not going through the tumor, you can save the nerve. This is called total conservative prostatectomy. You conserve the facial nerve and you take off the whole prostate gland, both the superficial and deep lobe. There is no such treatment like partial prostatectomy. No operation for partial prostatectomy for cancer. Second thing, if the tumor is involving a branch of it or one division is involved, you sacrifice it, and other you save it. This is called total, means total prostate, total semi-conservative prostatectomy. You have partially conserved the facial nerve and partially you have sacrificed it. And the third option for cancer of the prostate is if the tumor has invaded the facial nerve on the operation table, or clinically the nerve is involved, then there is no chance that you should save the nerve. Otherwise, you can leave the tumor behind. The treatment will be radical prostatectomy. So for the cancer of the prostate, local operation will be total conservative prostatectomy, total semi-conservative prostatectomy, or third one is the radical prostatectomy. It means en bloc section of the facial nerve along with the prostate, and whatever the structure is involved, that has to go in en bloc section. Then second thing, what to do for the lymph nodes. Sometimes they are clinically enlarged, sometimes they are radiologically enlarged, and sometimes they are not clinically enlarged, not radiologically enlarged. So what is the option you should have as a surgeon? The valid consensus is when you do the operation for carcinoma of the prostate, you must perform the modified block dissection of the neck. You spare the facial nerve, spare the spinal accessory nerve or sternomastoid or internal jugular vein, depending upon the extent of the spread of the tumor. And even they are not involved, you have to do this conservative block section, or you can say the modified block section of the neck. It has been seen in 15 to 40% of the cases when you get a cancer of the major salivary glands, the micrometastasis has gone already into the ipsilateral group of the deep cervical or interior cervical change. So you should do the modified blood section on the same side. It has been seen under the microscope. 30% of people they have got a micrometastasis which is not revealed clinically or radiologically. And I told you radiological investigation are CT or MRI. MRI is more sensitive regarding the soft tissue, but CT with IV contrast gives you a lot of information about the bones also, is it involved or not. So the treatment of the cancer of the major salivary glands, either it's a parotid or submandibular gland, total excision of the gland, which is called total prostatectomy. If the facial nerve is involved, you will do the radical prostatectomy. If you partially save it, you say the total semi-conservative prostatectomy. Total prostatectomy, total conservative, total semi-conservative, or radical prostatectomy. In any cancer of the prostate or the submandibular salivary gland, you must do the modified block dissection of the neck. You can eliminate the tumor deposits which are in a very small in volume at this stage, and it is very helpful to control the bulk of the disease at earliest time. Once the secondary has gone afterwards, then the bulk of the tumor is too much in the lymph node, and probably you cannot get the same result as you do in the first operation. So the treatment is total prostatectomy or total excision or the submandibular salivary glands. Number two, if the nerves are involved, they have to sacrifice them partially or complete, plus the modified block dissection of the neck, of the cervical lymph nodes. Of course, afterwards, you must also give irradiation to the same side, minimal or proper irradiation to the contornatal side. That is the proper treatment of the cancer of the prostate or a submandibular salivary glands. I have told you the complication, the dreadful complication is that when the facial nerve is not involved for a benign tumor, you damage the facial nerve. That is one of the dreadful complication when you are doing the prostatectomy for a benign tumor. You damage the facial nerve, either the main trunk or its branches. Second complication is called Frey syndrome. You damage the fibers of auriculotemporal nerve, which is a secretomotor to the parotid gland, so when injury to the auriculotemporal nerve, you will find there is a short circuiting of the fibers of the auriculotemporal nerve. Their axon, they grow into the sheath of the nerve, cutaneous nerve element. So when patient wants to eat or something, it thinks to eat, there is a secretomotor fibers of auriculotemporal nerve which stimulate the salivary glands. As there is short circuiting of the fibers with the cutaneous nerve, there will be hot flush in that area, flushes, sweating, and so this is what is called Frey syndrome. This is not a common, but it does happen as a Frey syndrome is a complication of prostatectomy, or when you place the incision for incision and drainage of the parotid abscess. This is short circuiting of the auriculotemporal nerve with the cutaneous fiber which supply the sweat glands and as well as the blood vessels. So at the time of eating, chewing, the patient has a profuse sweating in the preauricular area, and there is also vasodilatation, and area become a pink one. So this is what is called Frey syndrome. Is self-limiting disease. It sometimes is settled down with the time. In old days, there is no treatment except the anticholinergic drugs. Then they start doing the tympanic branch of auriculotemporal nerve on the tympanic membrane, which is called as the tympanic neurectomy, which is done by the ENT surgeons. Nowadays, if the disease is not settled down or not self-limiting, and the patient is very much worried about this phenomena of hot flushes and the sweating on the face, and so the answer is you can use the Butox injection, which is the botulinum toxin. The toxide is you inject in the skin and the subcutaneous tissue in the preauricular area, so you damage the nerve endings of the blood vessel and the sweat glands. So this is what is called injection Butox. In the preauricular area, you inject in the skin and the subcutaneous tissue, because this is the area where contains the cutaneous blood vessels and the sweat glands. So injection Butox is a last resort when this Frey syndrome is not settling down. Majority of the patient is a self-limiting disease and it's settled down. One. The second complication is injury to the facial nerve. It depends upon either you have damaged the main trunk or a branch, or one of the major divisions you have damaged it. If the main trunk is damaged and you have removed a segment of the facial nerve along with the tumor, the answer is you have to either do the immediate nerve grafting with the greater auricular nerve, or you can have got also the sural nerve which can interpose between the two ends of the facial nerve. And later on you can use the, if the patient comes late after the surgery, you can have other options also, the hypoglossal facial nerve transfer, or you may use also the facial slings, dynamic facial sling from the temporalis. The various plastic procedures are available immediate. You can do the nerve grafting, the sural nerve or the hypoglossal nerve. And the third complication is the which is you can find the patient complaint of there is a loss of sensation in the lobule of the ear, and during shaving they feel that there is an anesthetic patch in the periauricular area or above the ear, and that is basically injury to the greater auricular nerve, in which you have got a loss of sensation in the lobule of the ear. That is injury to the greater auricular nerve, facial nerve, and the third one is the Frey syndrome to the auriculotemporal nerve, which leads to short circuiting. And the last and not the least, sometimes you have got a parotid fistula, because when you cut the gland, there is a small salivary secretion come out through the wound, because there is no anatomical bonding with the superficial lobe and the deep lobe. So there are small connections between the superficial and deep lobe. They can sometimes leakage of the salivary secretion. You applied a tight bandage there and avoid the things which can increase the flow of the salivary secretions, and it is self-limiting disease. After a couple of days or 4 or 5 days, this salivary fistula or a discharge from the wound having a saliva, it will be stopped by a pressure dressing and avoid the things which can enhance the salivary secretions. That all about the cancer of the major salivary gland. Minor salivary glands, they are malignant tumors. Benign, unlikely, 75% of the minor salivary gland have malignant tumor, and the commonest tumor in the minor salivary gland is the adenoid cystic carcinoma. The treatment, you have to do the open biopsy to confirm the diagnosis, and then you have to excise the minor salivary gland tumor in the oral cavity with 1 centimeter all around, and after that you may give the chemo or radiation depending upon the location of the tumor. There is no role of chemotherapy in the cancer of the prostate, or not the primary role of radiotherapy. Radiotherapy can be used as an adjuvant therapy after doing the surgery. It can it improves the quality of and also the longevity of the patient, but per se chemotherapy has not plays any role in the prolongation of the survival. The master role is the surgeon. You do first surgery, it should be adequate enough, and it should be a radical resection. It should avoid the cytoreduction or marginal resection if is permissible, because the cytoreduction is not indicated in cancer of the prostate, because the tumor will blow out again in a very bad shape if you don't excise properly. So better thing that you should irradiate them for advanced cancer of the prostate or submandibular gland when it is not possible for you to encompass the tumor. And all these radiotherapy and chemotherapy, they are the palliative, but adjuvant radiotherapy does play a very important role in a proper plan, and if you perform the executed surgery with the planning, I think it will bring the good results. Thank you very much.